Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest narration in the web series Wearing Power Armor to a Magic School. If you're new to this series, there is a playlist listed down below in the description, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 66, The Adversary. I hate Earthrealm, the Venerian repeated once more, this time louder and with greater conviction. Those words resonated at odds with the calm and otherwise uncompromising serenity of the projection around us. In a sense, falling flat against the completely unassuming atmosphere, consisting primarily of a clear and high-pitched harmonics of the wind chimes, the rustling of leaves on the rooftop park, and accompanied by the occasional interruption, courtesy, of the hustle and bustle of the city echoing far below and above us. The annoyed and disgruntled glare of the Lupanar directed towards the deluxe kobold more or less cemented the inappropriate mismatch of words, and quickly demonstrated that not all were on the side of the Venerian in his resolve. "You stand against everything the Nexus upholds," he continued, unabashedly, unconcerned by the Lupanar or any of the expressions he threw his way. "How so, Eleanor?" I shot back, questioningly, redirecting the flow of the conversation to something that might finally gauge the success of this whole cross-cultural information dissemination exercise, and determining once and for all if the Venerian had finally crossed the information dissemination overthrow threshold. Or, for lack of a better term, if he'd gone full idiot, though the diplomatic corps and the associated academics back at home preferred to keep the acronym to the more professional IDOV threshold, for reasons of maintaining academic register. "How so?" he parroted back in that indignant, almost condescending tone of voice. "How so?" he repeated, guffawing out of barely contained nervous laughter. "Where do I even begin? As a state, you are structured the wrong way up. As a polity, you are absurd. As an institution, you are seditious. And ultimately, as a civilization, you are preposterous. You are facilitated solely by mannerless contraptions that exist to mimic and parallel that which is exclusive right to those preordained by fate and the hands of the eternal truth. You are a realm of madness, fueled by nothing but spite against your own mortal limitations and—" "Succeeding in spite of it," Thalvin interrupted with a self-satisfied chuckle, crossing his arms as he just about cautioned himself against leaning his weight against the tree. Despite that, he still effortlessly loomed over the Venerian, or more accurately, to the themes of this whole venture, succeeding because of it. "Success is not just measured by raw potential for creation or the matching of capabilities, but by the longevity by which they are able to persevere," Eleanor rebutted promptly, prompting me to finally re-enter the fray with a self-satisfied smile brimming underneath my helmet. "Success or not, you agree then that this, sightseeing experience has been quite eye-opening?" I couldn't help but to let out a little pun, if only to cool things down somewhat, as well as to provide an off-ramp to the point that I was leading up to. "Eye-opening, for all the wrong reasons, Earthrealmer," Eleanor muttered out, not once shifting in his convictions, which could only mean one thing: the presentation worked. "For reasons that we can continue to work on in the future, I imagine. I'm certain you still have quite a few questions," I began offering before being cut off by Thasia, and surprisingly the EBI at the same time. "And not enough time to address them at present," Thasia interjected, pulling out a timepiece as if to emphasize her point. "Suggestion, Cadet Booker, disengage from instigating another line of questioning that could potentially lead to a no-win cross-cultural information dissemination CCID failure." Both, surprisingly, were suggestions that led me to the same conclusion I was heading down anyway. A conclusion that even the Venerian himself had preempted, if his response was any indication. "I do," Eleanor stated in uncertain terms, "and I expect more next time as well, especially from that." He pointed at the few of the space planes rocketing across the sky, as well as the more visible intracity VTOL craft that meandered from rooftop platform to rooftop platform. The fact that he never once raised the issue of the falsification of fakes following the walk through the city was a massive unspoken win. The fact that he'd moved the goalpost further along, now raising fundamental issues with how Earthrealm works, rather than the outright doubt in Earthrealm's existence, meant that whilst the Venerian hadn't blatantly admitted it, he was now firmly in the believer camp, although with a lot of personal grievances and plenty of reservations over everything his mind had to accept as truth. Though the final say on that success could only be made by the raw and unfiltered logical machine that was the EBI. "Evie, how are we looking?" Information dissemination overflow crisis with Illinois has been averted, Cadet Booker. Moreover, information dissemination overflow thresholds within Thalman, Dacia, are calculated to be within acceptable ranges. This cross-cultural information dissemination exercise is within the acceptable margins of success, calculated to be within a standard deviation of 0.02 as per SIOP CCID models. Thanks, Evie. Addendum. Prior suggestion remains active. Understood. I'm disengaging now before I spoil the pot with too much of a good thing. With a final affirmative beat from the EBI, I turned towards Eleanor with a confident nod. I look forward to being grilled on everything else you have on your mind, Eleanor. For now, just take notes or something until next sightseeing session. I'm sure you'll find something to like, or at least something to not hate, I offered with the same polite, diplomatic, inclined tone of voice, prompting the Venerian to simply nod, all the while responding with an impudent huff. I highly doubt that I shall find anything worthy of fondness, Earthrealmer. The fondness shall be in watching the Nexian sensibilities be tested, I should say, Bellman chimed in cockily. Eleanor didn't take the bait, thankfully, which prompted me to finally end this whole thing with another snap of my fingers, and a little blurb of caution to the group. You might feel a bit woozy with this being the first time, so just make sure to stare at the ground for a few seconds as the projection winds down, I offered politely, as the world around us slowly faded away to a featureless white, before breaking down chunk by chunk, until all that remained was reality around us, the rotating arms of the projector and the blackout top just beyond it. Everyone remained uncharacteristically silent as the machine wound down, and the whirring of the motors rang out in the titular whoosh before dying down with a satisfying kathunk, locking in place, ready for disassembly. At around the same time, a small ding at the top right-hand corner of my HUD suddenly made the existence of a new collapsible fault known, and my 2-second gaze was all the prompting it needed to simply explode, revealing what amounted to the nestled death stack worth of notifications that had been subtly hidden from view up to this point, most, or rather all of them, being matter radiation warnings that had either been muted by my orders earlier, such as during my confrontation with the Dean, or warnings that had occurred after the fact without my prompting. The most notable of which being the latest blip of matter radiation corresponding to the start of my little presentation. Evie, I have taken preemptive measures to minimize the disruptive effects of matter radiation notifications on your operations, Cadet Booker. Following prior prompting, I have begun the process of categorizing and subsequently delineating pertinent radiation warnings from warnings of a lower threat categorization threshold. Right, I responded. It's part of the user adaptive mission profile, right? Affirmative. Okay then. Next time, prompt me before changing something like that. Affirmative, Cadet Booker. Quick question, Tasia. I finally sprung up, just as the group was beginning to leave the confines of the blackout tent. Yes, Emma? You've been projecting those privacy fields this entire time. Yes. Is there an issue in... No, just checking, I acknowledged, prompting Tasia to crane her head in confusion just for a moment as I mentally took stock of that little development. We eventually found ourselves out in the little blackout tent, arriving in the room that was completely dark, if only because the sun had finally set, following the amount of time that we'd spent in the sim. Wow, I began with a small chuckle. I hadn't expected to pull another one of those so soon. I half thought that I'd left dawn to dusk immersive gaming sessions behind when I stepped through that portal. I guess life has a way of bringing back your hobbies in a roundabout ways, huh? Immersive experiences and hobbies, for that matter, can have a way of eating away at your time, Thalman responded with a matching chuckle, skipping the offhanded gaming comment altogether, all the while stretching his arms and bending his torso from side to side. Speaking of immersive experiences, I'd like to point out that future presentations won't come without a price, I continued with a certain sly look on my face, not that any of the gang could see it. My mission, or rather what my people have always intended my mission to be, is one of cross-cultural exchange. Exchange being the operative word here. I came here in order to foster relations and to learn. So, if you guys are up for it, I'd love to see and hear more of your worlds, your unique cultural perspectives, and your ways of life, I quickly added, diffusing the rather ominous statement I started out with. Thalman was the first to react to this with a look of genuine surprise, followed by a smile and a look of appreciation that seemed sudden but not entirely out of place. That can be arranged, he announced confidently, followed by a nod from the princess and a shrug of acknowledgement from Eleanor. But why? Eleanor shot back emphatically, before just as quickly closing the gap by making it clear that the question was nothing but rhetorical in nature. Do you see your realm so lacking in culture that you would wish to learn from those who have clearly succeeded where you have fallen short? No, Eleanor, that's not it at all, I replied with a tired breath. My people are simply curious, and with this being as close to the next and final frontier for my kind, it's only natural that I want to learn more at every given opportunity. Speaking of which, I was actually planning on making this a weekly tradition of sorts, a means of strengthening the bond between our peer group and perhaps our realms, I offered, once again propping up an off-ramp for the conversation, a conversation that Eleanor was clearly trying to incite conflict within, fostered by his current progress on the 5 stages of grief, with denial now firmly past and anger currently out in full display. A weekly traditioner, Bellman pondered with a rub of his chin, before nodding soon after. I can most certainly commit to that idea. If only to see more of what this realm of debauchery has to offer, to see the cracks slowly form in the facade of your unsightly creations, then I, too, tentatively subscribe to these terms without the ties that bind. Eleanor followed shortly thereafter, which now left Thasia, who simply let out a polite sigh. I do not hold anything against such a venture, Emma. However, I wish to emphasize the fact that this arrangement must be non-committal in nature, as when factoring both our academic and personal duties, this exercise in cross-cultural exchange should be considered an addendum rather than a fixed goal. So a side quest between our major quest lines. Gotcha, I acknowledged, with an understanding nod, prompting Thelma to cackle somewhat, and Thasia to simply stare back at me with a little in the way of acknowledgement, as if waiting for me to tackle it in greater severity. In all seriousness, I completely understand, Thasia. I know that we have both the house-choosing ceremony and the town trip for school supplies coming up this week. Coupled with your quest for the Amethyst Dragon and Eleanor's library debts, it would seem as if we have a week that should prove to be challenging to start off with, she quickly added, reminding me more of the EBI now, with the relentless reminder of responsibilities I still had to tackle with. All right, well, should an opening now time slots emerge, we'll finagle in our weekly exchanges. But until then, our duties come first. Is that okay with everyone? I announced, eliciting a firm nod from all parties. And on that note, I believe it is time that we all finally retire for the night, Thasia politely added, once again pulling out her timepiece for added effect. A little manner notification pinging quickly made itself known in the newly created folder in the corner of my HUD, a new feature the EBI had seemingly made in presence of my earlier confrontation. I agree. This entire venture into the obscene has gone on for long enough, Eleanor promptly announced, before turning tail and prancing towards the door with a flourish of his mauve cape. I bid you good night, Princess Delani. He gave a typical closing nod to his fellow noble, then turned to acknowledge me with a look of tired and begrudging acknowledgement. And you, Cadet Emma Booker. This has been a conflicting state of affairs, to say the very least, and I wish for my noble sleep prior to tomorrow's classes. The little blue thing left with an expected slam at the door, prompting Dalman to follow shortly thereafter, but not before turning towards both me and Thasia with a confident smile. Whatever happens, I wish to reaffirm my commitment to this peer group and the special arrangements that we have made. I look forward to seeing how this week progresses, Emma, and I thank you, Thasia, for having kept a careful overwatch over all the proceedings thus far. Good night, and may the guiding light of the hunter's wisdom stay your hand with the teachings of the hunt, Ephes Fighter. And just like that, we were once again alone. The expected return of the whirring of my machines never manifested, all thanks to Thasia's noise-suppressing magic. A brief sigh, only audible within my helmet, punctuated the bout of silence, as exhaustion from the continuous hour-long presentation on humanity suddenly hit me with the force of a truck. Emma, I heard the familiar chirp of Thasia's more informal tone of voice bubbling to the surface, breaking through that layer of exhaustion as I felt compelled to respond without a second thought. Yes, Thasia? There is a matter I would like to discuss with you, she stated politely, a regalness coloring her voice with an authoritative undertone, prompting me to nod and follow as she plopped herself on the couch at the edges of the blackout tent. The projection you presented and the mannerless wonder shown within are but a glimpse and nothing more, I'm assuming. Yes, I nodded promptly, but there's a reason for that. What I introduced the pair to, and to the extent yourself as well, Thasia, was a crash course in our realm's history. It was decidedly reductive by nature, I acknowledged, prompting the Avenant to nod once in reply, as she gestured for me to continue. But given the sheer breadth and depth of my world's history, I had to start somewhere, even if that somewhere was a relatively narrow sliver. I did at least try my best to capture what I believed was some of the best, but also most mundane elements my world had to offer. And yet your best and mundane was, by every measure, a perfect counter to the Crownlands proper, Tassia responded with a stark sense of firmness, before leading off into another tangent. But that is beside the point. The matter I wish to raise is something that lurks beyond the obvious. We have a saying in my realm, Emma, a saying that doesn't necessarily translate to High Nexian, but I feel it's fitting for this conversation. For as rich and expansive as the blue skies above are to those of the flighted flock, so too does a richer and perhaps even more expansive world exist just beyond the waves which reflect it. This stems from those of my kind, the other races of my own species, that are capable of diving deep beneath the waves, in the northern kingdoms and in the coastal constituent principalities. There they tell tales of great beasts and unseen wonders lurking just below where the light cannot penetrate. I have a feeling that this old adage applies to our current situation, Emma, for there exists so much more far beneath the depths where the light cannot penetrate. Or, in your case, the princess's voice shifted, her eyes now piercing straight into my own, where the boundaries of the skies themselves cease. I knew where she was going, and I had no intention of halting the inevitable. I assume that you are referring to the long thin strip visible from beneath the skies of the projection. Dacia's eyes momentarily lit up at this. Correct, Emma, Dacia acknowledged, seemingly satisfied at my frankness, her expressions always seeming to be relieved with each passing response, as if a lifetime of wishy-washy expectant decorum conversations had probably predisposed her to assuming that every response and every question was bound to be a meaningless serving of word soup. For there exists no natural phenomenon, no matter how bizarre, especially in a mannerless world, without magic and its associated anomalies, that can explain away an object looming just beyond the reaches of the sky. And for such a structure to exist, to remain aloft the heads of untold millions, implies there must be something far greater at work. So tell me, Emma, what exactly was up there beyond the reaches of the heavens? What has your kind done to have changed? Perhaps, in permanence, the very sight lines above your heads. You recall what I told you in the library, right? That your kind has, and I quote, raced to expand across the heavens, that you have likewise taken your tentative first steps across the stars, that your kind's destiny was always to cross the distance of oceans, whether that be oceans of water or oceans of stars. Dacia surprisingly parroted back everything I had spoken of to the librarian, prompting me to momentarily pause out of a sense of shock at a picture-perfect recallability. Am I to assume that this thin grey line is but a stepping stone in that venture? It is, Dacia. Oh well, it was built well after we took our first firm steps into the stellar backyard. So you acknowledge, then, that this fixture above the skies is in fact a structure of your making, she reiterated, as if trying to overcome the sheer disbelief still welling beneath the surface. Yes, but honestly, it is a bit clearer and considerably more obvious at night. The projections were locked to daylight for a reason, and it was to avoid the other two becoming a bit too curious about something they might find difficult to believe at first, especially when given everything else they had to acknowledge. That was a wise decision on your part, Emma. So, with that being said, do you want to see our skies at night, just for a bit, before getting some well-deserved sleep? A small pause once more punctuated the conversation, as Dacia's eyes deliberated this offer with precise intent, following it up in short order with the only appropriate response of such an offer. I believe that we have half an hour to spare, yes. Dragon's Heart Tower, level 23, residence 30, Eleanor and Dalman's bedroom, local time 21:20, Dalman. I'd left Emma and Dacia's apartment, and more specifically, that sightseer experience with a certain level of disbelief. Shock, for all intents and purposes, welled up within me. But that was nothing if not tempered by a newly found resolve to consider the potentials of a contrarian worldview that prompted me to question everything I knew. That feeling of smallness was, simply put, never followed up on. For unlike those crown lands visited by a sightseer, there was no expectant follow-up, no acknowledgement of superiority, no humbling acts of fealty. There was nothing from the Nexian playbook of browbeating following the superior show of force. In fact, there was the exact opposite, a desire to exchange further information, as if my realm had any that could truly matter to what the Earth realm had to offer. Yet despite that, the offer was there, genuine and without any strings attached. Something the Nexus would never do. Something the Nexus would consider poor play by their rulebook. These thoughts and more were, however, rudely interrupted by a small blue thing exiting the bathroom clothed in a series of exorbitantly priced robes as he turned towards me, whilst propping himself against a couch 2 sizes too large for him. Still, it looked as if it was made for him, given how comfortable he seemed atop the plush adornments. Yet that comfort seemed to do little to ease the frustrations of what was clearly welling within. Frustrations which eventually bubbled to the surface in the form of what the little blue thing was known for, whining. The absolute gall of that new realmer to have taken it upon herself to purport the truth of a world that dares challenge Nexian primacy by virtue of their mere existence. I beg your pardon, Prince Thelman. You heard me, and you saw it too, did you not? All I saw was spiteful testaments belonging to a race that knew not their own limitations, wanting more, constructing a travesty, refusing reason, and embracing madness. And yet, despite it all, they surpassed those limitations without so much as the usage of a single vial of mana. I stated bluntly, prompting the Venerian to go silent, which I took to my advantage for my own amusement. I wonder then, since Earthrealm is in so many ways comparable to the illustriousness of the Crownlands, how may this affect the balance of powers? Or if primacy is proven to be faulty, then what becomes of the status Eternia? You will halt any such seditious postulations, Prince Thalwyn. But what if, Eleanor? Then what you speak of is the final confrontation. The what? Those words seemed to frustrate the Venerian, as he responded with an irksome gaze. The arrival of this foreign culture, born of foreign constraints, nurtured in the auspices of foreign patrons, bringing about fundamental axiomic shifts that would threaten the eternal sanctity of the civilization. The manner in which you are describing Earthrealm, and the disruption you speak of, would place them firmly in the role of that adversary, the greater other. If that is what I speak of, then I suppose it may very well be the destiny of Earthrealm, Lord Reluria, I acknowledged, humouring the Venerian with a dry chuckle. This is no laughing matter, Prince Thalman, Eleanor rebutted immediately, not allowing for a moment of dead silence to hang in the air. What I speak of is a true prophecy, an inconvenient truth, he reiterated, prompting me to reassess his entire angle as my perspective shifted from merely humouring the Venerian to actively listening to his newfound points. So I ask, do you or do you not believe Earthrealm to be capable of challenging the status Eternia? Would the existence of a realm that rivals the Crownlands in almost every metric, without the aid of mana, arriving as a new realm with no contact to the greater community, be considered a challenge to the Crownlands' primacy, Eleanor? The Venerian paused for a moment, before begrudgingly agreeing with a slight hiss. Yes. And would a challenge to primacy equate to a challenge of the status Eternia? The former does not always lead to the latter, Prince Thalman, Eleanor responded reflexively, if only to pause and reassess his statement. But if you are insinuating that to be the case, then I am assuming your answer to my question is that Earthrealm is in fact capable of challenging the status Eternia. Your words, Lord Valeria. I responded diplomatically. Not mine. In which case, I must ask you then, Prince Thalman, Eleanor trailed off, his features shifting from a contemptuous look of frustration to one that could be tentatively described as thoughtful. Yes, I urged the Venerian. Please get on with it, Eleanor. I wish to know where you stand when the calls for apocalypse summon the righteous, Prince Thalman, the Venerian announced completely out of nowhere, taking me by surprise. There was more than likely the intent of that abrupt shift in subject matter. I wish to know, should your assertions bear truth, and should the new realm move from a position of a mere contemporary to one of an active adversary, where shall your loyalties lie? My loyalty shall forever lie with my people, my family, my kin, Lord Valeria. And should Earthrealm propose an offer for an alternative to the status quo, my loyalties remain the same. I will do what is best for my people. That is the end of the matter, Lord Valeria, I answered with a tempered tone of voice. Memories from the proving den resurfacing to grant me the instincts to play the role of the measured diplomat once more. A diplomat's answer, Eleanor scoffed. I cannot blame you, Prince Thalman, But be warned, there are consequences to those that disrupt the tempo of the status Eternia. I ignored that empty threat completely, circumventing it with a question that was poised to strike deep into the heart of the Venerian himself. And what of you, Lord Reloria? Where will you stand should the calls for apocalypse divide the realms once more? The Venerian, surprisingly, went quiet. Whether it was his shock at my question, or whether this was him actually giving the question pause for thought, was anyone's guess. The surprising fact was that the latter was given a possibility in the first place. With civility, Prince Talman, Eleanor finally responded with a resolute breath, with civilization, and the side that stands for the protection of what we have built. For despite what my words and my actions might lead you to believe, I genuinely do subscribe to the axioms of civilization. I will not allow the sacrifices of my ancestors to be in vain, Prince Talman. So whatever happens next, be it in a week, a month, a year, or a decade, remember that the decisions we make today will ultimately carry on through the descendants of tomorrow. The unbroken chain shall remain unbroken. Hence why you are shackled by the past, Lord Reloria, I replied back with a hushed breath. Remember that the tempo of history is not truly eternal. Your kind were once servants. Today you are rulers. What might tomorrow bring? Greater heights or depreciating depths? As you said, Eleanor, we are at a crossroads. Perhaps now is the time to choose your standing, and the manner in which you conduct yourself following these disruptions in the tempo of eternity. A great silence befell us once more, as Eleanor seemed to actually ponder my words. It was around the same time that I too started thinking long and hard on the implications of Eleanor's supposed prophecy, and for a short few moments I actually began to ponder the possibilities of Earthrealm's palpable challenge over the claim of the Nexium primacy. This has been an interesting night for all of us, I imagine, Prince Talman, Eleanor began, as he got back to his feet, placing both his hands behind his back in perfect posture. I hope that you will reconsider my words and the warnings which lie therein, with the severity it deserves, as I know deep within those layers of fur lies a man of civility. But for now, I bid you a restful night. The Venerian quickly scampered, after that, up the stairs and towards his bed. This left me with a series of newfound questions I hadn't anticipated, all culminating in a single thought that summed up the entire night as well. What happens next? End of chapter. I'd quickly like to thank the T5 peeps: Cold War Boomerwaffen, Sevaren Serberous, Bushmaster 177, Henry the Red, Casper Arnholtz, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Elijah Silvercross, Dragzoon W.R.E, and Sevaren Serberous. Thank you very much.